Dragon Emperor Sun Chapter 411 to Chapter 420. Don't Mr. Chen know? Wu Laihui looked puzzled. David shook his head with a smile. I'm not from your martial arts world, so I'm not very clear. Wu Laihui remembered the scene when David fought with Master Bohuo, and he also understood that it seemed that David was a warlock, not a warrior. Seeing this scene, Wu Laihui can only explain, our martial arts world is very strict, and we can't be called a martial artist until we develop our inner strength. And the inner strength is divided into the inner strength small, the inner strength master and the inner strength master, and these are subdivided. Each realm level is divided into 9 grades. This is why I, Qifeng, Sun Yaobang and Zhang Zhengzhong are both masters of internal strength, but the reason for their different strengths, I am only the second-rank master of internal strength, and Qifeng and Zhang Zhengzhong are estimated to have reached the 4th rank. On top of the internal strength masters, there are also martial arts masters, and even martial arts masters, but I have only heard of these, and I have never seen such masters. Listening to Wu Laihui's explanation, David can be considered to have a general understanding of the martial arts world. It turns out that the martial arts world is the same as David's immortal cultivation world. Realm, corresponding to the martial arts world, what realm can you reach? Just when David was thinking, Wu Laihui continued to say, so I sent my second son to the Bajikwan line to learn from an early age, and I hope he can surpass me in strength in the future. Just as Wu Laihui finished speaking, he saw a young man walk in and said as he walked, Dad, I'm busy practicing right now, this time I must help us get Bajikwan well at the martial arts gathering score. When the young man walked in, David was shocked at a glance. He found that this person looked exactly the same as Wu Dong. If Wu Dong was not sitting there, David would definitely admit his mistake. Mr. Chen, this is my second son Wuxi, they are twins. Wu Laihui followed David's introduction. David smiled slightly, nodded, and said hello to Wu Xi. However, the name of this family has given David a lot of insight. Wu Dong, Wuxi, Wu Laihui, the name of this family is really arbitrary. Wu Xi was stunned for a moment, glanced at David, and found that David was only the same age as himself, and his father actually called him Mr., with an extremely respectful attitude, which made Wu Xi frown and said, Dad, you say family the distinguished guest is here, isn't it him? UBA5TARD, what are you talking about? Why don't you come and see Mr. Chen? Seeing Wu Xi's arrogant attitude, Wu Laihui immediately cursed. Seeing that Wu Laihui was angry, Wu Xi could only walk up to David very reluctantly, I have seen Mr. Chen. David just nodded slightly and did not speak. What's your attitude towards Mr. Chen? Are you looking for a fight? Wu Laihui saw that Wu Xi was not convinced, and immediately scolded him angrily. Patriarch Wu, young people have high spirits, it is understandable, you don't have to do this. David persuaded Wu Laihui. David didn't care about Wu Xi's attitude. Since stepping into the world of immortality, David's mood has gradually changed. Hey! Wu Laihui sighed, if my 2 sons can be like Mr. Chen, I will have no regrets even if I die. Dad, I'm in the realm of Niajing Master now, and within 3 years I will definitely surpass you. Seeing his father belittling him in front of outsiders, Wu Xi said with some reluctance. Master Nei Jin is nothing, just sit by the side and let Mr. Chen give you some pointers. Wu Laihui knew David's ability. Zhang Zhenzhong's kind of Nei Jin master was slapped to death, and a Nei Jin master dared to shout in front of David. Wu Xi was very unconvinced, but instead of talking, he found a place to sit down and started to eat. Patriarch Wu, what is the martial arts gathering that Lingzi said just now? David asked curiously. Mr. Chen, the martial arts gathering is a conference held by the martial arts families and sects in the entire Jiangnan and Jiangbei provinces, mainly to allow the younger generation of martial artists to communicate and learn together. However, in order to increase the enthusiasm of the younger generation, every time the martial arts gathering will reward the winners with some medicinal herbs and precious medicinal materials. Such martial arts gatherings are held once a year, organized by the Yaoangfu, and the rewards are also given by the Yaoangfu. Actually, there will be a lot of treasures at this martial arts gathering. The sale of medicinal pills is also a marketing strategy of the Yaoangfu, and it is used to sell medicinal pills. However, after these years, there are indeed many people participating, and there are often some rare ones. Medicines and treasures appear. Wu Laihui followed David to explain in detail. Oh! There is such a party. David suddenly became interested. Then I don't know if I can participate. Of course you can, all martial artists from Jiangnan and Jiangbei provinces can participate, but it is limited to the younger generation, and the age cannot be more than 35 years old. Like us old men, we can only watch from the side. Wu Laihui continued with a wry smile, it's just that if Mr. Chen goes to participate, I'm afraid you will be the winner, and the others don't have to fight. Hehe, Master Wu has won the prize. David laughed. Wu Xi, who was eating by the side, couldn't help rolling his eyes after hearing this, obviously not convinced. Then when will this martial arts party be held? David asked Wu Laihui. That? Wu Laihui thought for a while, as if he had forgotten what time it was, so he asked Wu Xi, how many days will the martial arts gathering be held? 1 week. Wu Xi said without looking up. This child, Wu Laihui glared at Wu Xi, and then smiled apologetically at David. After eating, at the gracious invitation of Wu Laihui, David must give instructions to Wu Zi or two. David was also helpless, so he could only follow Wu Laihui to the martial arts field of the Wu family. In fact, David had long guessed that Wu Lu was so respectful to him and hospitable, and he must have asked him for it. When they arrived at the martial arts field, Wu Lu said to Wu Xi, you can do a set of punches and ask Mr. Chen to give some pointers. Wu Xi was very reluctant, but he could only helplessly put on a posture. I saw Wuxi's feet slightly apart, standing on horse stance, and then stomping his feet suddenly. Everyone only felt a slight tremor on the ground, and after Wuxi raised his feet, a deep footprint appeared on the hard ground. Second young master really reached the strength of Master Niajing, it's really not easy. Qi Bo said in surprise after seeing it. The servants of the Wu family around him also praised him, which made Wu Xi's face full of pride. Wuxi's set of Bajiquan is playing with a tiger, and the strong wind is whistling constantly. Even if you are separated by a few meters, you can feel the power of the strong wind, and there are deep footprints under Wuxi's feet. Mr. Chen, I would like you to give some pointers to the dog. After Wuxi finished a set of Bajiquan, Wu Laihui respectfully said to David. David nodded, this set of Bajiquan is strong and powerful, it's really good, but it's a pity that the increase in strength has sacrificed speed. People, it's all in vain. Wu Laihui nodded again and again after hearing this. Wu Xi's set of punches was indeed strong and powerful. He deliberately increased the strength of every punch and every kick, so this caused the speed to slow down. When Wu Xi heard that David actually said that his Bajiquan was slow, he was immediately unhappy. In addition, his heart had been holding back his anger, and he burst out immediately, and said to David, Boy, if you really have the ability, do you dare to play 2 moves with me? I'll show you how slow my Bajiquan is. UBA5TARD, why did you talk to Mr. Chen? Wu Laihui was shocked. This Wu Xi dared to talk to David like this, but he was frightened. Wu Laihui would rush over to teach Wu Xi a lesson. Who knew that David reached out his hand and stopped Wu Laihui? Master Wu doesn't need to be angry, I didn't say it, it's normal for young people to be angry, I'll just have 2 moves with him. When Wu Laihui heard it, he hurriedly said in a pleading tone, I also ask Mr. Chen to be merciful. Don't worry, I won't hurt him. David said lightly. With these words, Wu Laihui was relieved, and it just happened that David could control Wuxi's arrogant appearance. You must know that there are days outside the sky, and there are people outside people. Wu Liuyi sometimes wonders if these two children are his own. Each of them is extremely arrogant, completely opposite to his own personality. Dad, you should beg me to be merciful. If I hurt your VIP for a while, don't blame me. Wu Xi said with disdain. Wu Liuyi ignored him, because he knew that Wu Xi would be honest after a while. David jumped lightly, came to Wu Xi, and said lightly, "You hit me, I only dodge, never fight back, let you know whether your Bajiquan is slow." David said, put his hands behind his back, and stood quietly. Wu Xi was stunned for a moment, and then said angrily, "Boy, you are too crazy, if you get hurt, don't blame me." "No." David shook his head. Wu Xi suddenly stomped under his feet. This time, the ground should have been stepped on by this foot, and cracks appeared. The cracks spread everywhere, and they cracked several meters long. Immediately after Wu Xi exhaled, the blue veins on his face tightened, and the whole person exuded a terrifying breath, like a cheetah, staring at the prey in front of him. Suddenly, Wu Xi smashed David with a punch. The punch was strong and powerful, and the sound of breaking the sky suddenly sounded. Facing this punch, David still stood quietly, with his hands behind his back, as if he didn't care at all. But just before Wu Xi's fist reached David, David's head lightly turned to one side, easily dodging Wu Xi's punch. Wu Xi was stunned for a moment, then became furious, and punched David again. This time instead of attacking David's head, he went towards David's abdomen. I saw David's abdomen retracted, one sideways dodged the punch, and then his body reversed, directly behind Wu Xi. What? Without hitting two punches in a row, Wu Xi was completely furious, his mouth roared, his fists were like shooting stars, shrouded towards David. This time, he actually used both fists, but unfortunately, no matter how fast his fists are, even the corner of David's clothes can't be touched. In just a few minutes, Wu Xi had already punched more than 100 punches, but he missed a single punch. Wu Xi stopped, panting heavily, his forehead was covered in cold sweat, and his energy was almost exhausted. At this time, David still had his hands on his back, and he couldn't see a trace of fatigue. He smiled slightly, "Do you believe your fists are too slow now? Humph, you're just relying on your flexibility. Do you dare to punch me? With your physique, I can break all your bones with one punch." Wu Xi was still not convinced. David smiled, "Now that you are exhausted, how can you fight against me?" After speaking, David raised his foot and stomped lightly on the ground. In an instant, the whole ground shook, and it was like an earthquake. Wu Xi's body couldn't stand and fell directly to the ground. And look at David's feet, one after another deep cracks spread out more than 10 meters, and David's calf has fallen into the ground. Raising his feet, David walked back to Wu Liuyi lightly. But Wu Xi was dumbfounded when he fell to the ground. Looking at the half-meter deep pothole in front of him, Wu Xi's Adam's apple rolled, and finally realized that David's strength was not comparable to him at all. The master of internal strength is above the 8th rank, no wonder his father is so polite to him. Thinking of this, Wu Xi got up immediately, walked to David with a respectful face, and knelt down with a thud. "I have no eyes, I hope Mr. Chen will not take offense." Seeing Wu Xi kneeling down for himself, David was a little surprised. He reached out and picked Wu Xi up. Although the brothers of the Wu family are arrogant, their ability to admit their mistakes and turn back is really unusual, and it doesn't seem that they are not at all like Wu Liuyi. Follow your heart and shape at will, so that your speed and strength can be exercised. Instead of worrying about one thing and another, the gains outweigh the losses. David patted Wu Xi on the shoulder. Strength from the heart, shape at will? Strength from the heart, shape at will? Wu Xi muttered to himself, his eyes suddenly lit up, and his face was full of excitement. Thank you Mr. Chen for pointing out, I know, I know. After Wu Xi finished speaking, he ran directly to the martial arts field and began to practice, and he continued to mutter, strength from the heart, shape as you wish. Wu Liuyi looked at Wu Xi with satisfaction, and then said to David gratefully, thank you Mr. Chen very much. If Mr. Chen is useful to my Wu family's place, my Wu family will go through fire and water, and I will do anything. It's just a little effort, Wu Patriarch doesn't need to be polite. David smiled faintly. At this moment, Wu Dong came over, and then respectfully said to David, Mr. Chen, the original stone is here, I don't know you. Okay, I'll take a look with you. David nodded. Wu Dong drove and took David to leave the Wu family directly to a warehouse in the suburbs. This is where Wu Dong stores the rough stones. After all, the shops in the market are too small to hold these rough stones. After David and the others arrived, a small black car drove up soon, and a white-haired old man with reading glasses and a cane in his hand got out of the car. Seeing this, Wu Dong hurried up to meet him, Old Pei, be careful with your steps. Seeing Wu Dong's appearance, he respected the old man very much, and carefully helped the old man over. Wu Dong, that is to look at your father's face. Otherwise, I will never be running around at my age. I am helping you. This time, I should retire. That Old Pei said with a displeased expression. Old Pei, if you retire, it will be a big loss for us to gamble in the stone world. Wu Dong quickly complimented him. Old, my health is dying. Pei Lao waved his hand, but I heard that this time the amount is very large, even if you look at your father's face, the cost should not be too small, at least this amount. That Old Pei stretched out a finger and gestured towards Wu Dong. 1 million is not much, Pei Lao is worth this price. Wu Dong said hurriedly. 1 million for what? Pei Lao's face turned cold, it's 10 million. 10 million. Wu Dong's eyes widened in shock. Why, do you think it's too much? I know that this time you came to Hungshan Stone. If it's all good, how much money can you make, do you still need me to tell you? That Old Pei said coldly to Wu Dong. Okay, 10 million is 10 million, Wu Dong gritted his teeth. He helped Pei Lao to a chair to rest. Wu Dong walked to David, and said a little embarrassedly, Mr. Chen, this Old Pei is an old gentleman in the stone gambling world, we will ask him to hold hands when we buy rough stones. It's not that I don't trust Mr. Chen, but I hope Mr. Chen doesn't misunderstand. It's okay. David smiled slightly. After waiting for about half an hour, a truck drove over, followed by several cars. After the car stopped, a middle-aged man got off the first car. The middle-aged man wore a diamond ring on his hand, a gold chain with a thick thumb on his neck, and a cigar in his hand. From the other cars, a dozen bodyguards in suits came down, all wearing sunglasses, exuding a terrifying aura, and they were not weak at first glance. Mr. Feng, come to me to deliver goods, and bring so many bodyguards. Are you looking down on me or my martial arts family? Wu Dong said and walked over with a smile, followed by Mr. Feng and shook hands. Of course I know the strength of your Wu family in the provincial capital, but this car is all high-grade Hungshan rough stone, and it is very valuable. If something goes wrong halfway, I will become a beggar in the future. President Feng laughed, revealing two big golden teeth. Mr. Feng's worth, let alone a carload of Hungshan stone, even if he bought the entire Hungshan mountain, it would be more than enough. Wu Dong touted Mr. Feng. Young Master Wu has won the award. Even though Mr. Feng said this, his face was full of smiles. David on the side looked at Wu Dong with admiration. Although this kid doesn't like to practice martial arts, he is really a good businessman. After Wu Dong exchanged a few words with President Feng, then President Feng walked directly in front of Mr. Pei who was sitting in the chair, and said politely to Mr. Pei, Elder Pei, you are going out in person today. This car of Hungshan stone is very valuable. Wu Dong is not at ease, and invited me in person. Pei Lao was still sitting, his eyes slightly closed and said, Master Wu, we have been dealing with each other for so many years, but you still can't trust me, Lao Feng, and invited Lao Du personally. President Feng looked at Wu Dong and said half-jokingly, Mr. Feng, be careful not to make a big mistake, not to mention that the price of this batch of Hungshan stones is not low. Wu Dong also smiled slightly. In this case, let's inspect the goods first, but I still say the same thing, this is the original stone, I will not guarantee that you will produce gems, or what kind of gems will be produced. After the inspection and the transaction, I will not return it. President Feng said with a serious face. I understand, these don't need to be explained by President Feng. Wu Dong nodded. Soon, a carload of rough stones was dumped in the designated place. This carload of stones was of different sizes and shapes. If you didn't know how to do it, it was no different from ordinary stones. Old Pei, I'm tired. Wu Dong stepped forward to ask Pei Lao to inspect the goods, and personally helped Pei Lao up. Pei Lao nodded, took out a magnifying glass, and a very delicate little hammer, and walked to the randomly selected rough stone. With so many rough stones, it is unrealistic to check them one by one, so I can only randomly select a dozen pieces and let Pei inspect the goods. As for whether these dozen or so stones can represent the quality of a carload of rough stones, no one can say for sure, it all depends on luck, and gambling on stones itself is a matter of luck. Just when Pei Lao carefully looked at the rough stones, David suddenly frowned slightly, then walked to the pile of rough stones, and then bent down and started to pick. President Feng glanced at David and did not stop him. He thought that David was a subordinate brought by Wu Dong. David kept picking aside the rough stone in front of him, and soon a stone with a smooth surface and an oval shape appeared in front of David. David showed surprise in his eyes, and slowly picked up the stone. When David's hand touched the stone, a pure spiritual energy drilled directly into David's body. The aura contained in this egg-sized stone was even more abundant than the aura in the jade that was dozens of times larger. Is this the spirit stone? David's eyes widened, his eyes were full of incredible. After picking up this stone, David closed his eyes and sensed it again, and found that there was no more aura surging in the stone. Where did you get this stone? David took the spirit stone and walked towards Mr. Feng excitedly and asked. President Feng glanced at David with disdain in his eyes, snorted coldly, and ignored him at all. I ask you, where did this stone come from? David grabbed Mr. Feng's collar and said anxiously. Mr. Feng's face was furious, and those bodyguards surrounded him instantly. Wu Dong hurried over when he saw this. Mr. Chen, what's the matter? Wu Dong stepped forward and hurriedly pulled David away, and then said apologetically to Mr. Feng, President Feng, I'm sorry, it may be that Mr. Chen is a little excited when he sees that these rough stones are good. Humph, today is not because of Wu Dong's face, I have to abolish this kid. President Feng snorted coldly, waved his hand, and made the bodyguards retreat. David also felt a little gaffe, so he calmed down. Mr. Chen, is this stone in your hand a gem? Seeing David holding a stone the size of an egg, Wu Dong asked. Oh, it's not a gem, I just think this stone is a bit special. David shook his head, and then asked, are these stones mined from Mount Hung? Yes, look at the color and shape of these stones, they are all mined from Hungshan, but there are not many small stones like yours in Hungshan. Even if there are goods in this kind of stone, it is not worth a lot of money, too small. Wu Dong explained. David smiled and said nothing. Wu Dong didn't understand the importance of this stone to himself. It seems that I have time to go to Hungshan, maybe I can find the spiritual stone there. David thought to himself. Excellent, this Hungshan stone is really superb. This emerald green can be seen so clearly from the outside, you can't go wrong when you open it. After 10 minutes, the old man suddenly exclaimed loudly. When Wu Dong heard it, he hurried over, "Old Pei, do you think there are goods in these dozen or so stones?" "Of course, come and see." Pei Lao took a small flashlight and took a picture on the stone, and soon a green luster appeared inside. Mr. Pei struck again with a small hammer, knocking off the outer skin, and the green inside became even more vivid. Wu Dong was overjoyed immediately. This kind of good stuff can come out of a dozen randomly selected stones, so there must be no shortage of this car. This is really good luck. "Old Pei, thank you very much, I will call you for your reward in a while," Wu Dong said excitedly. Pei Lao nodded, sat back on the chair, and began to rest again. It was really easy to earn 10 million. "Master Wu, I said that this batch of goods is of the highest quality. If you buy it, you will definitely make a lot of money," President Feng said to Wu Dong. Wu Dong smiled and said, "President Feng, tell me the price, how much is this car of rough stones?" As a rule, Hung Shan stone is twice as expensive as other original stones, so this car is 300 million. If you don't negotiate the price, you can make a return for a few imperial greens. Besides, the shipment rate of Hung Shan stone is very high. President Feng stretched out 3 fingers and said. Wu Dong hesitated, and then looked at David. After all, David is now a major shareholder, and David has the final say. "What is Mr. Chen's opinion?" Wu Dong asked. "These stones are garbage, not to mention 300 million, 30 million is not worth it," David said lightly. As soon as David's words landed, Old Pei, who had planned to rest his eyes slightly closed, suddenly opened his eyes. And Mr. Feng said angrily, "Boy, what are you talking about? Do you understand gambling stones? I am a carload of Hung Shan stones. You said it's not worth 30 million? It's a joke. Wu Dong, where did you get them out of, boy? Among the dozen or so stones I just looked at, ice seeds, emperor green and chicken blood red can be vaguely seen. You saw it yourself just now, and now you actually said that a carload of Hung Shan stones is not worth 30 million. Pei Lao stood up and said with a cold face, "I think this carload of rough stones is not much at 300 million. If you don't want it, give it to me." Mr. Pei just said that these stones are top quality, but now David actually said that they are garbage, which is not obviously following Mr. Pei's opposite. How can Mr. Pei not be angry? "Don't be angry, Mr. Pei." Wu Dong hurriedly persuaded Mr. Pei, and then looked at David with a puzzled face. "Mr. Chen, this car of Hung Shan stone is really good, and the price of 300 million is not high, otherwise. You don't believe me?" David looked at Wu Dong and asked coldly. No, how could I not believe Mr. Chen?" Wu Dong waved his hands again and again. "Since you believe me, then don't want this truck of stones." After David finished speaking, he walked to the side and sat down, and began to play with the spirit stone in his hand. Wu Dong's face was full of embarrassment, but he finally walked up to Mr. Feng and said, "President Feng, I'm really sorry, I can't take this car of rough stones." Then Mr. Feng was stunned for a moment, and then he said with anger, "Wu Dong, Mr. Pei said it is the best, but you don't believe Mr. Pei. It's ridiculous to believe in the words of a hairy boy. Since you don't want it, then I will find another seller. Let others make a fortune." President Feng's words made Wu Dong very uncomfortable, but since David had spoken, Wu Dong did not dare to stay even if he wanted to. "Mr. Feng, I want this batch of rough stones, and I will show them today. Opportunities don't come all the time." Pei Lao walked up to President Feng and said, "Old Pei, since you want it, I also bleed a lot today, and I gave you 250 million, but I want to transfer money on the spot, and I will not owe it on credit." "No problem, I'll transfer the money to you right away." Pei Lao was overjoyed. This export was 50 million cheaper, and he was able to get this big bargain. Because he didn't have enough money, Mr. Pei started to call to borrow money, and then called someone to transport the rough stone away. About an hour later, Pei Lao's money was collected and transferred directly to President Feng. Looking at those rough stones, Pei Lao was very excited, gave Wudong a cold look and said, "Today, I will show you young people what is the best Hung Shan stone, the stone that the old man has seen, dare to say garbage." After speaking, Pei Lao ordered people to cut open the dozen or so stones he had seen. While cutting the rough stones, Pei Lao's face was full of pride. "Shipped. Old Pei, I have a long way to go and I have to rush back. You can drive slowly here." Seeing this, President Feng said to the old man Pei, "Mr. Feng, don't go, follow me to witness, so that their young people can gain insight." Pei Lao grabbed President Feng and said. I saw that Mr. Feng's face was a little embarrassed, but he could only stay. Wudong watched from the side, his eyes were red, he was really envious, but unfortunately David refused to accept it, and he could only watch others make money. Soon, more than a dozen rough stones were cut open, and when the rough stones were opened, everyone was stunned. I saw that after the rough stones were cut, there was nothing in them, just ordinary stones, and they were covered with cracks. As for those greens and reds seen from the outside, they are just a layer on the surface of the stone, as if they were deliberately smeared. How can this happen? Is it impossible? Old Pei's eyes widened, and he looked at the dozen or so rough stones like crazy, and then shouted, "Continue to open for me, and open all the rough stones here." Soon, dozens of pieces were opened, but nothing was found. They were all ordinary stones, and there was not even a single jade seed in it. "No need to open, there will be nothing, waste of time." David got up slowly and threw the spiritual stone in his hand. Mr. Pei's whole body seemed to be stupid, his body swayed twice, and then he rushed towards Mr. Feng with an angry face. "How dare you lie to me and return the money?" Old Pei was holding onto Mr. Feng's collar. Mr. Feng's face was angry, and he no longer had the respectful look at the beginning. He pushed the old man hard. "Old man, the rules of the stone gambling world, you have seen it yourself, how can you rely on my head?" After pushing the old man away, Mr. Feng turned around and took someone to leave, but the old man said, "Stop them, don't let them go." The people called by Mr. Pei instantly surrounded Mr. Feng and the others. Mr. Feng's bodyguards saw this and immediately shot. It only took a few tens of seconds to knock Mr. Pei's people to the ground. "Humph!" Mr. Feng snorted coldly, then glanced at David and said, "Boy, I remember you, it's best not to let me see you in the future." After threatening David, Mr. Feng left with someone. At this time, Pei Lao sat paralyzed on the ground, his face was ashen, and he began to cry. He borrowed money to buy these, and now they are all garbage. With so much money, what will he use to pay it back? David glanced at the old man, and then said to Wudong, "Let's go." Wudong nodded and followed David respectfully. Now he admires David with all his body on the ground. If it weren't for David, he would be sitting on the ground crying now. "Mr. Chen, where are we going now?" On the way, Wudong asked David. "Go to Gambling Stones, you show me the rough stones of the entire provincial capital, I'm short of money now." David said without hesitation. "Okay." Wudong looked excited and took David straight to the Gambling Stone street of the market. For a whole afternoon, Wudong took David lightly and swept across the Gambling Stone street of the entire provincial capital. No matter what kind of rough stone, they could deliver it. I looked at almost all the rough stones in the provincial capital, such as Imperial Green, Chicken Blood Red, Ice Seeds, etc. I don't know how many were sold. Wudong will sell the stones on the spot and exchange them directly for money. "Mr. Chen, we earned 2 billion in one afternoon." In the evening, on the way to send David home, Wudong shouted excitedly. David leaned on the back of the chair and rested with his eyes closed slightly. 2 billion was too little for him, and David's spiritual power was exhausted for half a day, and now his body is a little tired. After sending David home, Wudong left a part of his money and transferred the rest to David, and David also told Wudong to buy more rough stones, especially Hung Shan stone. It's not that David likes Hung Shan stone, he just hopes to discover the spirit stone again, which proves that the appearance of the spirit stone in Hung Shan is not accidental. As soon as David entered the door, he saw Sonia alone, sitting bored in the living room. When he saw David coming back, he hurriedly got up and greeted him. "You had lunch? Why did you come back at night?" "I'm bored to death." "Where's Gulingur?" David asked. "What? Do you miss her?" Sonia looked at David and asked. Looking at Sonia like that, David felt helpless for a while. Sometimes a woman's mind can't be guessed by a man. "I'm just curious, why didn't she accompany you?" David explained. "Linger's family has their own work, so it is impossible to accompany me every day. In order to accompany me these few days, they have not gone to work." Sonia said with a bitter face, "If the matter in the provincial capital is finished, let's go back to Zhongcheng tomorrow. My dad is at home by himself. I am a little worried." David frowned slightly. Now that the money has not been collected, and the medicinal materials have not been obtained, David is not at ease and leaves like this. Besides, there will be the martial arts party in another week, and David is planning to go around. "If you still have something to do, it's fine to stay for a few more days. I'll just say it casually." Seeing that David was a little embarrassed, Sonia hurriedly changed her words. "It's okay, I'll accompany you back tomorrow, but I won't be in Zhongcheng for a few days, I'll be back to deal with something." David smiled slightly. He happened to send Sonia back to Zhongcheng. After all, it was safer there. In the provincial capital, people from Feng's family and people from Suanya Valley might come to ask for trouble. Sonia is not safe here. Yet. Sonia nodded. Early the next morning, David called Chifeng, transferred the money in his hand to Chifeng, and told Chifeng that he was trying to find a way to let Chifeng talk to Yaoangfu as much as possible. Procrastinating 4 days. After Lin Tianhu knew that David was going back to Zhongcheng with Sonia, he immediately drove to pick up David. "Lin Tianhu, you don't need to go back, just find a reliable person to help you take care of the Juyi Hall first." David knew that Lin Tianhu and Chifeng were at a critical time, so he wanted them to develop more feelings together. Lin Tianhu knew what David meant, and his face turned slightly red. "Mr. Chen, when I go back this time, I will also explain to Juyatang. When you return to the provincial capital, I will come back with you." David smiled and said nothing. Lin Tianhu drove and took David and Sonia back to Zhongcheng. When they arrived in Zhongcheng, it was already afternoon. David and Sonia did not go to the Pinerist villa, but went directly to the Sua family villa. As soon as she entered the door, Sonia shouted excitedly, "Dad, we're back!" Reuben was drinking tea in the yard. When he heard Sonia's shout, his face suddenly burst into laughter. Come and sit here." Reuben beckoned. David carried some local specialties from the provincial capital and put them on the stone table. "Uncle, I don't know if you like it or not, but I bought you some local specialties." "Ha ha ha, you bought it, I like it, sit down." Reuben personally poured a cup of tea for David. David sat opposite Reuben, while Sonia sat next to Reuben, leaning on Reuben's shoulders, like a child. "David, this time in the provincial capital, did you encounter a lot of trouble?" Reuben asked. "Fortunately, everything has been resolved," David said with a slight smile. "If you are in trouble, don't carry it yourself, we are a family now, so don't see outsiders," Reuben said. "Yet." David nodded. Reuben put his hand into his pocket, then took out a bank card and put it in front of David. "David, there are 5 billion here, although it is not much, you can use it first, I know you are short of money recently." David was stunned. For the Sua family, 5 billion was almost the entire net worth. "Uncle, I can't ask for this money. The Sua family's property is yours for the rest of your life." How can I ask for it? David thought that Reuben had sold the entire Sua family property. David, I heard you when you called. I knew that you were short of money, so I informed my dad, you should take it quickly. Anyway, my dad is only my daughter, and the things in the Sua family will be mine sooner or later. Sonia said to David. Only then did David know that it is no wonder that Reuben asked David if he had encountered difficulties as soon as he entered the door. David, you are too young for my Sua family. Although the 5 billion is a lot, it is not what I got from selling the property. Speaking of which, there is still a lot of money from you. The money from selling small repayments to Dan. It's also here, and the relationship between you and Sonia is well known in Zhongcheng, so many companies have cooperated with my Sua family, which has made us a lot of money. And all the properties of the Xiao family. If it weren't for you, how could I buy it at a low price? So you deserve the money, so you should take it. If it's not enough, we're trying to find a way. Reuben persuaded David. David felt warm in his heart, nodded, and put away his bank card. With this money, he could collect enough money for the medicine of the Yaoangfu. Seeing David collect the money, Reuben smiled slightly and continued, just come back, you two go to rest first, there is a banquet at the Regal Hotel in the evening, Ancient, and Mayor Ling knows that you are back, so thinking about sitting together, there are quite a few rich people in Zhongcheng, all waiting to flatter you. David smiled helplessly. In fact, he didn't like this kind of entertainment very much, but Gu Wenchen and Ling Zhenchuan were there. After all, the two of them helped him a lot, and they always had a decent face, so David nodded and agreed. Reuben wanted David to rest at the Sua family villa, but David still planned to go back to the Pinarist villa, where after all, there was more spiritual energy. After David broke through to the foundation, he had not practiced well. Reuben asked Sonia to follow David back to Pine Bay. When he parted, Reuben did not forget to exhort Sonia, Sonia, take care of David more, Dad is not stubborn, if you can give me a baby, the eldest grandson, I will watch your children all day long. Dad, what are you talking about? We're not married yet. Do you talk to your daughter like that? Sonia blushed, glared at Reuben and said. It's hard to say, you guys will go get your certificate tomorrow, Dad will hold a wedding for you and guarantee the most luxurious wedding in Zhongcheng. Reuben smiled. Ignore you. Sonia took David and left, leaving only Reuben laughing at the back. Back at the Pinarist villa, Sonia was tired after riding for a long time, so she lay down and rested. David transferred the money to Chifeng and asked her to get the medicinal materials as soon as possible. Then David sat cross-legged and began to practice slowly. After entering the foundation building stage, David's demand for spiritual energy is getting bigger and bigger. But not long after David entered the practice, the phone rang suddenly, it was Chi Feng. As soon as the call was connected, Chi Feng came with an anxious voice, Palace Master, something happened, all our men in Jiang's villa are dead. When did it happen? David frowned. It should have happened in the morning. It was my negligence that I didn't come here to check, and now I found out that everyone is dead. Chi Feng blamed himself very much. David's face was gloomy. Although he came back, there are still people guarding the Zhang family villa, and now everyone has been killed. Do you know who it is? That Zhang Zhend? Or someone from Suanyuegu, or someone else? David asked. I don't know, but since the other party didn't find you here, he will definitely go to Zhongcheng. Please pay more attention to yourself, Hall Master. Chi Feng reminded David. Okay, I see. David finished and hung up the phone. David's deep eyes are full of killing intent, no matter who comes, the soldiers will block the water or cover up, and kill one by one.